the Honored One, the Forever Serpent, the God Pharaoh. These are just some of the titles of the fiercest, most dominant, and godlike being in all of Magic the Gathering, Nicol Bolas. And when you really dig into the deep lore of MTG, there's truly nobody as bold, powerful, and villainous as this Elder Dragon. He's not just a villain of a plane, or even one of the many strong planeswalkers, he's the personification of power, arrogance, ambition, and cosmic consequence. His journey and story spans the entire multiverse itself. He dominated the Elder Dragon War, he creates and destroys empires, and became a being whose sheer existence is a threat to the entire multiverse itself. Now, before I dive into his story, let's talk about this dude's build. Who and what even is a Nicol Bolas? Well, for starters, he is a massive dragon. He clocks in at 35 feet tall, a clean 60 feet long, and rocks a 60-foot wingspan. You and me both, big dog! Now, from a game mechanic and magical standpoint, his mana is represented by 3 colors: blue, black, red. As you know, there's 5 main colors in Magic, and they all generally represent certain things. And in Nicol Bolas' case, I think they perfectly line up with his philosophies. Blue mana represents his knowledge and manipulation, black mana embodies the power and death that he brings, and his diabolical impulses and chaos are seen in the red mana. Needless to say, Nicol Bolas is built different. He can single-handedly, or I guess single-clawedly, dominate in every dimension. Physical, magical, intellectual, ideological, he's just a straight-up beast, and it's all thanks to his insane upbringing. Nicol and his twin brother, Ugin, were both hatched together from an X-stone of the Ur-Dragon, the progenitor god of all dragons in Magic. He's pretty gnarly himself and complicated, so just know that like he's a super dragon daddy for the Elder Dragons in Magic. And so the Horned One and the soon-to-be Spirit Dragon were the only pair that actually hatched together, making Nicol and Ugin super unique amongst their other siblings. Twins aren't that common in the dragon world, so move over Chromium, these boys are gonna change the world. And Nicol's villainous motives all echo back to this early part of his life, because he was originally mocked and looked down upon for his twin nature. He was like the Rudolph of Elder Dragons, basically, and all the other spawn of the Ur-Dragons were bigger, stronger, and more powerful than Ugin and Nicol, at least at first. As a result of this teasing, Nicol felt the sting of being looked down upon. He really oozes little sibling energy, to be honest with you, and this feeling of weakness caused him to change his name, adding Bolas to it in an effort to get on equal footing with his other siblings. This way, he was then viewed independently of Ugin, and as you'll see toward the end of his story, names are quite important to this insane godslayer. Which means that, yes, bullying is what caused this dragon to become god, and by that logic, I should be god. So then what actually set him up for his eventual multiverse conquest? Well, it was an early experience with the worst creatures of all time, humans. You see, after Bolas was taken in by his elder brother, Arcades Sabbath, Bolas actually learned from the men that Arcades ruled over, and he actually gained his most valuable skill from them, the art of manipulation. A scorned younger brother with a thirst for power was given the last tool that he truly needed to rule, the power of influence. So after learning the powers of gaslighting, gatekeeping, and dragon bossing, Nicol Bolas finally began his rapid ascent. He fought in the Elder Dragon War, which was this massive and ancient conflict amongst the Elder Dragons, and through sheer grit, determination, and clever plotting, Nicol Bolas came out on top of everything, but spared many of his own siblings, and then proceeded to rule over their plane. Now, as you probably know, in Magic, the multiverse is broken down into worlds, better known as planes, and the one that Bolas eventually ruled half of is called Dominaria. But while Bolas was conquering, an even crazier thing was happening at the same time. Because remember Ugin, the other twin? Well, he ignited his spark, which is the Magic equivalent of gaining multiversal power. And this then transformed Ugin into a planeswalker, and that really pissed Nicol Bolas off. So much so that he managed to ignite his own spark, turning Bolas into a planeswalker too, a being able to traverse the multiverse and walking between the different worlds, between the different planes. And just to highlight how unbelievably powerful Nicol Bolas was at this point, Sarkin Vol, a Dragon Master and eventual Planewalker himself by the way, described the way that Bolas moved through the multiverse as though he moved the planes around him, not the other way around. Nicol Bolas bent the multiverse to his own will, and the only being in his way now was his big brother, Ugin, which as you can imagine then led to this absolutely beastly duel between Bolas and his brother Ugin on the meditation plane, which is a spiritual realm outside the normal planes of magic. Now Bolas seemed to successfully slay his own brother Ugin during this matchup, but Nicol's own injuries caused him to plummet through the multiverse, eventually landing him back on Dominaria on the islands of Madara. No, not Madara, that's the goated Naruto villain. I'm talking about Madara, the island. So yeah, if that wasn't clear, this period of his life was absolute key to his story. Because now, no longer was he just an epic powerful dragon, he became a truly cosmic player. So, back to his life story. After landing in Madara, Nicol Bolas threw down with a massive demonic Leviathan planeswalker, and that fight also got really intense. It lasted an entire month and literally tore the entire island apart, even ripping time itself. That's right, Nicol Bolas literally created a time rift during that battle, and keep that in mind for later on. Now when the battle was finally over, Bolas devoured the Leviathan's corpse for a year, soaking up its power in a victorious feast. All that was left then were the Talon Gates, which he keeps as his ultimate trophy. And so for centuries, Bolas would eventually just return to these gates just to admire his own handiwork. I actually do that with my past foes too sometimes. So, as you can tell, Bolas had gotten unbelievably dangerous at this point. And this then drew the attention of the Planeswalker Azur and the reborn Spirit Dragon, Nicol Bolas' twin brother, Ugin. Yeah, turns out he's first of all the wrong way around, but he's also not dead. So, these two then decided to team up to trap Bolas forever. Their plan was to use Azor's Planeswalker Spark to power an artifact called the Immortal Sun and lure Bolas to the dinosaur Aztec-style plane of Ixalan. There, Ugin would erase his evil twin completely. But turns out that Bolas actually caught wind of that plan and flipped the script on them. He went to the draconic plane of Tarkir, manipulating Yasova Dragonclaw, a warlord who hated dragons, by promising her a dragon-free world in exchange for finding Ugin. And together, they then ambushed Big Oog, turning Ugin's own dragons against him. Naturally, Bolas came out on top, proving once again that messing with him only gets you the horns, baby. This time Bolas really thought he'd finished Ugin for good, so he left him dead and broken after their clash, but centuries later, through some time quangle shenanigans, the Planeswalker Sharkan Vol traveled back in time to this very moment and sealed Ugin in a Hedron cocoon, saving him that way. And to nobody else's knowledge, Bolas' victory was completely erased that way. The time stream had now changed, and that's the one that we'll continue to explore. Because here on out, Bolas then made his way back to Madara, and after realizing that he accidentally had tied himself to Madara's mana, which was blue, black, and red, Bolas created his own shrine and his throne. Thus, Nicol Bolas crafted his title God Emperor and ruled from there for 400 years. Eventually though, of course, this rule ended up biting Bolas in the butt. A mighty champion named Tetsuo Umezawa rose, determined to defeat Nicol Bolas. And Tetsuo managed to get Bolas' spirit into the meditation plane again. Then, by destroying his shrine, while Bolas' spirit and body were separate, Bolas was essentially killed physically, leaving only a phantom shell of the dragon who once was. So good job, Umezawa, that worked out great, but remember how I said earlier that Nicol Bolas made a time rift, a little while ago? That's right, Nicol Bolas literally created a time rift during that battle, and keep that in mind for later on. Well, it is that point of time now, and despite being decimated physically, spiritually, and mentally, Bolas' attachment to the Time Rift allowed him to live on in essentially a limbo between the material world and the meditation plane. Now, because of this very weird and unique state, Bolas was able to be a threat in several story moments going forward. He continued to meddle in Madara as the Time Rift grew stronger, eventually dismembering the Planeswalker Teferi. He also completely bodied yet another planeswalker, Leshrac here, sealing him in the Myojin of Night Reach's mask, which canonically proves that Nicol Bolas was the one who sealed Majora in Majora's mask. You're welcome, happy mask salesman. Now, following the weird time rift stuff of Madara, we enter one of the most iconic parts of Nicol Bolas' story. At one time, he became God Pharaoh of Amonkhet. Bolas at some point set his sights on the Egyptian-themed plane of Amonkhet, and it seems that he was mainly drawn by its unique metal, Lazotep, and necromancy practices there. And I mean, honestly, who can blame him for that, right? Now, in his pursuit of power, Bolas ravaged the entire plane, killing most adults, corrupting the true god of Amonkhet, and busting out, of course, his patented manipulation to convince the masses into worshipping him. And that's when he decided to enter his hella badass era, because Bolas declared himself the second son, aka the God Pharaoh, and set up prophecies and monuments proclaiming his own return, all because he's a master planner. And then Big Dog just kinda up and dipped right afterwards. You'll see why he did that in just a moment. But after all of this had happened, another key event in all of Magic lore occurred too: the Great Mending. TLDR, a powerful planeswalker from Dominaria named Jeska put an end to all the time rift nonsense by doing some crazy magic, stripping some planeswalkers of their powers and weakening the remaining ones as well. And they could still do their multiverse hopping, but Sparks became a lot weaker. Luckily for him though, Nicol Bolas was still an Elder Dragon and a super powerful being regardless. Though the mending did prove somewhat troublesome for the Horned One, and so he started to kind of bounce around the planes, keeping an eye on key events going on there. Here's a little speedrun for you. On the plane of Alara, he manipulated the shards to provoke the Conflux event. He also fought his own soul and kicked its ass, by the way. Kind of metal if you ask me. Then on the plane of Mirrodin, he made Tezzeret observe the new Phyrexians, aiming to stall their advancements and leverage the changing power dynamics there. And on the massively popular plane of Zendikar, Nicol Bolas took interest in the Eye of Ugin, a chamber-like prison built by his brother and Sorin Markov that kept the Eldrazi at bay. The Eldrazi, by the way, are these massive interdimensional god-eater-like elder god freaky things. They're really awesome, really complicated too, and I think they deserve their own video. All you need to know for now is that Bolas took a detour to try and release them to gobble up more planeswalkers. All of that, of course, was done so that he could eventually start the Great War of the Spark. Remember how Nicol Bolas became a god in Amonkhet and then just dipped? Well, that worked wonders because he came back and had a massive undead army ready to fight across the multiverse for him. During the Hour of Devastation, Bolas expertly dismantled the Gatewatch, which is pretty much the Planeswalkers' Avengers, I guess, and even converting one of the prominent members, Lillian Vess, to his own side. Then Bolas went over to the plane of Ravnica, a hustling and bustling city where the city of Ravnica is so big and important and prominent, it is pretty much the entire dang universe. And here's where Bolas unleashed his full master plan. He lured countless planeswalkers to Ravnica, trapped them with the Immortal Sun, the same item that his brother tried to trap him with, and then cast the Elder Spell, an ultimate weapon to capture Sparks and ascend to godhood. He was practically undefeatable and an omnipotent god at this point. But, well, you see, it didn't really work, and that's because Nicol Bolas' power and greed blinded him to the fact that his own manipulation would be his very downfall. Liliana turned his army back onto him, and the hero, Niv Mizzet, managed to get his hands on a weapon infused by Bolas' essence, a spear that Bolas had given to one of the gods of Amonkhet, and that then enabled one of the other gods of Amonkhet, Bontu, to harvest all the sparks that Bolas had consumed. And so in the end, even the mightiest can fall, it seems. And so after the War of the Spark, Nicol Bolas was defeated and neutralized. His twin brother Ugin, through some fancy spirit magic, stripped Bolas of his names and titles to prevent him from ever being summoned again. And Ugin and Jace together crafted a powerful illusion to double down on this very plan. Now, it did appear as if Bolas died, but he was actually imprisoned in the meditation realm, watched over by Ugin. Brotherly love, even in defeat, I guess. Really sweet. Good on you, Ugin. And there he remained in this diminished, nameless state for all eternity. Psych, he was only there until the events of Tarkir Dragonstorm because bunch of sick Dragonstorms started popping up everywhere thanks to Sharkin, and some Planeswalkers went to Ugin for help. He's kind of the all-knowing guy if you haven't caught on yet, but Ugin refused since all of his power and effort were devoted to keeping his brother at bay, and specifically avoided saying Nicol Bolas' name when acknowledging that his release would be way more dangerous than all these Dragonstorms. And then stupid Elspeth says Nicol Bolas' name out loud, restoring Bolas' power and titles, who once again battled his brother. They vanished into the multiverse, and Ugin returned to announce that Bolas was now once again free and ready to conquer again.
I shouldn't have said that. I should not have said that.
As you might be aware, this happened very recently. And honestly, when you take a step back, Nicol Bolas isn't just a villain, he is the villain. Arguably, he might be one of the greatest in all of fiction, honestly, because he defines what it is to be the big bad guy, and there's really no denying that he's crushing that. This runt of the litter eventually grew to be the mightiest dragon god, and that is of course why we all love him so much as a character and as a card. He is Nicol Bolas. He is inevitable.